They are the same thing and belong to the same family as this guy. And this, of course, is a fish. My friend the snook here looks like a regular fish. Our rays in here and the relatives do not, but they are the same family. They are fish. And what defines them as fish? Well, a couple of things. Number one, they have a backbone. A lot of animals have backbones. We have backbones, and we're certainly not fish. The defining characteristic of the fish is its ability to breathe underwater. All the rays and their relatives breathe underwater. They have backbones, so they're characterized as fish. Even though they don't look like this type of fish, they are indeed fish. But rays and their relatives, and what are their relatives? First of all, there are rays, and then there's skates, there's sawfish, guitarfish, and a very large member of the fish family, sharks, are all grouped together and are different than this type of fish. This fish has a very large scale generally. Rays and their relatives have a very fine scale called a denticle. On top of that denticle is a soft coating, sometimes a mucus coating. If you reached in and touched your rays, you felt how soft they felt. Very slippery. It makes for very efficient swimming. But the biggest difference between this type of fish and their rays and the other animals I talked about, skates, sawfish, guitarfish, and sharks, is their skeletal system. This type of fish has a bony skeleton, just like what we do. Rays and their other animals I talked about have a skeleton that's made up of cartilage, much softer material, more flexible. We have cartilage in our nose and our ears, there's cartilage in our joints. That makes up the skeletal system of those group of animals and separates them in the fish family from this type of fish. Okay, what makes up rays and stingrays in particular? They have a flattened body. Off the side of their body are pectoral fins, how they swim. They have a long tail. In the case of stingrays, they have a barb either the base of their tail or about a third to halfway down their tail. Now there's about 200 different kinds of rays. So out of those 200, about 70 or 35% are stingrays and classified as rays because they have a barb. So a majority of rays do not have barbs. An example of a non-stinging ray would be a manta ray. Very large ray out in the world's oceans, maybe 18, 20 feet across, weigh a ton or more, does not have a barb. It's not stinging. It's not considered a stingray, but it's still in the ray family. There are some electric rays. Most of rays swim in either salt or brackish water. There are a couple of freshwater rays also. So there's a wide variety of rays throughout the world. Their eyes are generally on top of their head or to the front and side of their head, depending upon the species. Right behind their eyes, you notice in the rays swimming around, you'll see little flaps opening and closing. Those are spiracles. That's how they breathe. They take water in their spiracles, extract the oxygen, and exhale through gill slits underneath them. Also underneath them, on the bottom of their body, is their mouth. They're bottom feeders. Not to mean they're at the bottom of the food chain, but just about all the food that they eat is found on the seafloor. They have sensors. They can detect the movement of food that they're looking for in the sand, scoop it up and eat it. In the wild, they'll eat primarily shellfish, clams, oysters, scallops, little shrimp, crabs, things like that. They'll find that and eat it, their mouth again down the bottom. I talk about skates just for a moment. Skates are very similar animals to rays. They have a flattened body, they have a pectoral fins, they have a long tail, but they're a completely different animal. Anybody ever see one of these wash up on a beach? Know what this is? Now, this is a dried up big case of a skate. And the water would be rubbery, very soft. A skate will lay, female skate will lay an egg in this egg case, sometimes called a mermaid's purse, and eventually a baby skate will hatch. Very common to see these worshipped on beaches on the East Coast, particularly further north. That's a skate. Rays, on the other hand, give birth to their young live. They may have anywhere from 1 to 9 or 10 pups, depending upon the species. So a major difference between skates and rays. In the water, they look very similar. A skate will have maybe a more pronounced backbone, a little rougher texture skin. In the water, they look very much like rays, but they are a completely different animal, and again, is centered around how they have their young. All right, this is the mouth of a ray. I mentioned that in the wild that they'll feed primarily on shellfish, little shrimp, crabs, and so on. The mouth of a ray is made up of a hardened or a calcified cartilage. They don't have sharp teeth for biting or chewing like we do, or sharks and other animals and so on. It's a flattened or a plate type of tooth. And they use that to crush their food. They can take a clam, for instance, crush the shell, eat the meat, and then spit out the shell. So this is the mouth of a ray. Okay, the working end of a stingray. Why are they called stingrays? This is the tail of a rough-tailed ray. The growth on its tail, these little growths here, are natural. That's why it's called the rough tail. This is a larger ray that's found out in deeper waters of the ocean. What I like to do is point out the barbs on it. Stingrays have this barb on it. This particular ray has 3 barbs. Our rays that we have in here would only have 1. But the barb is how they protect themselves. The barb is a formidable weapon. It's got little serrations to it. It's also a hardened or a calcified cartilage. You'll see little serrations to it, like little arrowheads. Easy to stick in, difficult to pull out. There's little grooves in the barb. There's venom associated with it. So it makes for a very painful injury. Now the thing with stingrays, though, is they use their barb for defensive purposes only. They do not hunt with it or anything like that. They only use it, as I said, for defensive purposes. They are attacked in the wild for food by sharks, hammerheads in particular, other large fish. And the only way they have to defend themselves is to lash out with their tail. Makes for a pretty painful injury. In shallow waters around here where we do have stingrays, like the ones we have, we suggest you shuffle your feet. We're able to detect your presence and more than likely swim away. Stingrays are not an aggressive animal. They are not looking for trouble. It's a response that they make when they lash out with their tail to defend themselves. It's the only reason they have it. And what do we have in our tank here? We have 2 kinds of rays. The first one is a cow-nose ray. That's the ray you see swimming around in here, the grayish ray. Very common ray around here, called a cow-nose ray because its nose looks almost like a cow's nose. This is a ray that will grow to 6 or 7 feet across when it's fully grown. So it's going to be a pretty good sized ray. Its barb is right at the base of its tail. You notice that its eyes are more to the front and side of its head. It swims around the water column most of the time. It wants to see in front of itself and down below itself for any predators. They'll form very large schools, pods called fevers, maybe hundreds or thousands of animals, and they'll migrate up and down the East Coast. They come down in warmer waters in the fall and head back to the cooler waters when they warm up in the springtime. So they'll be starting to head up north. Very common ray. Second ray we have here, the ones that are down the bottom, the smaller ray, is an Atlantic stingray.
Oh.
It's a ray that only grows about 2 or 3 feet across when it's fully grown. Its barb is about a third of the way down its tail. You'll notice that its eyes are on top of its head. Its lifestyle is that it stays down on the seafloor most of the time. It'll camouflage itself in the sand, so the only thing that will be exposed will be its eyes. That's the Atlantic stingray. Again, a very common ray in these waters around here. Now, we do have another ray in our property in the Gamefish Lagoon. We have a southern stingray. That's a light gray ray. Looks very similar to Atlantic, except its nose is more rounded. The Atlantic rays has sort of a sharpened, pointy nose. The southern stingray is a light gray with a rounded nose. Its eyes are also on top of its head. The barb is also about a third or so of the way down its body. So when you look inside our Gamefish Lagoon, you will see both cownose and southerns in there. When they get too big for this tank, you move them over to the Gamefish Lagoon. Their barbs are growing. If you look closely on them, at their tail, you'll see where the barb is growing back. We do trim the barb off. The rays in here does not hurt the ray at all. So like your fingernails growing, that does grow back, but to trim it back periodically. So there's no harm when we trim the barbs off of our rays. Okay, I mentioned what they feed in the wild. What do we feed our rays here at Florida Geographic? We feed them little pieces of fish. We have 2 programs here during the day, one in the morning and this one in the afternoon.